Hi there. Thank you. I didn't want to whistle in that mic. I might blow somebody's ears out. I'm Dan Gould. It is Thursday, April 12th. It's 9:30 in the morning, and this panel is panel number 4004, called Democrats, a House Divided. If you're on the wrong flight, please change planes. We have three panelists today. We had four scheduled, but unfortunately Molly Ball was not able to join us for the conference, and so we are pleased to have the three panelists we have, starting with Heather Hurlburt, and then Lisa Graves, and Ian Milhiser. I asked, you all have their bios, I'm not going to go through that, but I asked them all a question. Give me just a little insight into them, sort of, I said the Rorschach test. I said, give me a class that you did not like in undergraduate school. And I got some interesting responses. Heather said that when she was an undergraduate, she apparently didn't do very well, or didn't do as well as she wanted to with calculus. And so she was determined that she was going to do calculus again. And she actually did, and she got the grade she sought, which is an A. And why a person would go through calculus twice is, no. So, as a Rorschach test, so you know how persistent she is.
It also helps explain why I'm a Democrat.
So Lisa Graves started out as an art major, as I recall, and part of the way through her undergraduate career, she decided she was going to be changed to pre-law.
I transferred schools.
Transferred schools,
Yeah.
and the school she went to. This is after a couple of years of studying art, as an art major at the first school. And in order to graduate, she had to take an art appreciation class as a senior. So she had to learn all about who Rembrandt was again. And the woman with the pearl earring and all that kind of stuff all over again after having studied for it. And so she didn't fail that class. She managed to pass that class. Actually, she said that she blew the curve out, so they dropped her. She was an outlier, and it wouldn't be fair to the rest of the students, so they just dropped her grades and then used and scored on a curve minus her grades.
Sorry for that brag.
That's all right. You're allowed to brag for doing well in school. This is a college, after all. Ian said that he was a philosophy major, as I recall. Mm-hmm. And to graduate, they had to have Ethics 101. Which this was a small school that had only one person who was teaching ethics, and was a horrible person. Was a horrible professor, had a very bad reputation, and everyone avoided the majors anyway, avoided taking the class, hoping that this guy would take a sabbatical, and then we'd get a decent professor to teach ethics. It didn't work. So he had, in his last semester of his senior year, he took Ethics 101, and I'm sure with a bunch of freshmen, and survived the class. And yes, the professor was as bad as everyone said he was. He also told a story about his wife who took ethics at another college and took it in a pass-fail, and found out that she couldn't get a grade with pass-fail, and she couldn't get credit, and she needed that to graduate. So so she didn't have to take it over again. But the professor said, "You have to sign up for it again, and I'll give you the grade you would have gotten if you had taken it not pass-fail." So that worked out pretty well. Anyway, so there's our Rorschach test. The topic is kind of interesting. I think I'm curious what the answer is to Democrats, a House Divided. and we'll hear 3 different takes on this. We'll start with Heather.
Great, thanks, and thanks so much for having me. And I want to start by suggesting a little procedure that you too can adopt at home. Anytime you see a headline or hear a lead into a story or someone wants to talk to you about Democrats divided or Democrats in disarray, and it's very simple. We're going to take 3 cleansing breaths, okay? We're going to take 3 deep in and out. And in and out. And in and out. Now, over the last year, you've seen Democrats dramatically outperform expectations in state and local races around the country. You've seen, if you ignore the national reporting and you look at local reporting, or if you look at reporting that is not being done by an older generation of political commentators, you will read wonderful stories about local Democrats getting together and saying, you know what, we just want to solve problems, we just want to run the bums out, and we are going to work together to do that. So my first point, this is an overblown sort of item. And it's also a self-fulfilling prophecy in that the more that we tell ourselves that Democrats are divided, and the more we go looking for divisions, hey, guess what? We're going to find them. History is full of that. So I encourage you to choose to consume. And so if you get up and walk out of the panel right now, I can't speak for my colleagues who didn't get a chance to say anything to you, but I won't be offended. Choose to consume and promote less of the sky is falling. Also, I encourage you to ask yourself when you see those storylines, who's putting them forward and to what end? And what I notice is they're usually being promoted by people who perceive that the party is moving in a direction and they don't like it. So just ask yourself that. That's my point number 1. Now, point number 2, having said all of that happy talk, there is a reality. The Democratic Party in America is not and never has been a party in the classical European sense of a tightly ideologically or identity bound together sort of neat, cohesive party, okay? We're not the Bolsheviks. This is a good thing. We are a coalition. So are the Republicans. Theirs is just becoming a coalition of crazy people. But Democrats are a coalition of interest groups and identity groups. That is okay. Remember that the Founding Fathers were generally suspicious of parties and were very happy to have fewer and broader ones. That does leave us with certain challenges. Like right now, one challenge I would argue is that you really have to have you have to have 2 functioning parties to have a functioning 2-party system. And so if we have one party that's kind of not really functioning, that, poses problems for the other party. But we're a coalition, and that's okay. And coalitions engage in internal negotiation and bargaining. And that's normal and healthy. So when you see debate over what does it mean to be a Democrat on health care, what does it mean to be a Democrat on banking reform, what does it mean to be a Democrat on terrorism, those are good things. They're not bad things. Where we have a potential problem is when, and I don't want to, this is a real thing, I don't want to seem like I'm overly sugarcoating it, when the kind of polarization and pressure to define ourselves by what we're against rather than what we're for seeps in, as it inevitably does, into our internal deliberations. There's no way that Democrats can be insulated from the climate in the country as a whole. But if we don't head in, and we do have some really big internal differences we're going to need to discuss, just because the world has changed pretty dramatically. The United States is changing pretty dramatically. The environment we're going to face campaigning even this year in 2018, much less 2020. But we are a coalition. We're going to be a coalition. That is okay. And so to look at our differences that way is okay. Now, the last introductory point I want to make, and this is a place where my thinking has really evolved in the last year, and frankly, I am guilty of having been a little Pollyanna-ish about the Democrats in 2016 and thereafter. We do or did have a real problem, frankly, with the disconnect. I mean, just as the Republicans do, we had a real problem that grew up in terms of a disconnect between the national party and state and local parties, and a real problem with having allowed our state and local infrastructure and pipelines to decay pretty dramatically. And unfortunately, you can point the finger at our immediate past president. So something concrete that you can do about that in future is when you think about who you want to support in 2020, you should think about not just who you love most for her or his personality, but who you think is going to shepherd the party well, because again, our whole system is built on the idea of a party, and you may or may not like it, but that is, you probably do like it or you wouldn't be in this panel, but that is the system that we have. But here again, there's also good news, and I, somewhat to my embarrassment, mislaid my laptop because our hosts here at Boulder were showing us such a good time last night. So, so I don't have these statistics in front of me, but I can do something even better. The writer and political commentator Joan Walsh, who you may have seen on MSNBC and CNN, has a great piece in The Nation about the effort that's now underway to rebuild the Democrats' state and local base. And she lays out really well, and so I'm not going to quote you the numbers, I'm just going to send you to look it up and increase her traffic, how the number of places where Democrats are running candidates that we weren't running candidates 2 and 4 years ago, the number of people who are streaming into the state and local party process. And I'll just end by saying, on the one hand, that's fantastic. And on the other hand, in 2 or 4 or 6 or 8 years, we are going to have an amazing crop of new Democratic leaders and elected officials, some of whom might be sitting in this room or walking the halls of this conference. And they're not going to be beholden to the national party. And they are not going to see themselves as belonging to the kind of democratic infrastructure that produced the set of political leaders that we have right now. And that moment is going to be a very interesting transitional moment, which may pass as a generational transition or may turn into a conflict, something more like the conflict you've seen between factions in the Republican Party. So, I'll just conclude with the idea, for a coalition-based party after the trauma of 2016, Democrats are really in not such bad shape, and I think doing the right things to address very real problems that are there. But there is a generational and quite possibly ideological handover coming down the pike. So I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Heather. Before I have Lisa speak, I want to point out, I'm sure that what Heather said has raised questions, and you would like to get answers to those questions, and the way you can do that is one of 2 ways. There is an app that the Conference of World Affairs has an app, and you can actually type in the information for this panel and ask a question, and that question will show up on my phone. So you can do that way. I've already received one question, and we'll be having a question and answer period after the panelists speak, individually and then together. The second way is that we have 2 what are called producers in the room. There's a woman over here. Raise your hand. She has white cards and maybe pens. Do you have pens, and you can write the card, write your question on the card, and give it to her, and she'll get it up here. There's also a producer over here. So raise your hand if you want a card, and you can write the question on the card and get it. It'll get up to me. Okay? Now, go right ahead.
Well, good morning. My name is Lisa Graves, and I really appreciate Dan's introduction because I think I might take that as license to speak to you in my personal capacity and not in my organizational capacity, not on behalf of my organization, and that will free me to speak a little more freely with you about my opinions. I feel like I just want to begin by saying this crowd is amazing. Not just you're all good looking and smart, but that it's so, which you are, but it's so full. And I was really concerned when I saw that we were up against the orgasm gap, that we might have a little lower attendance. But I'm going to try to assure you that somehow this conversation today is going to bring more long-lasting pleasure to you. In the long run, if we can help make progress on these issues. So, I say that I really appreciated everything Heather said. I agree with almost everything you said. I just want to start in, I suppose, from a slightly different standpoint. I am a registered Democrat, but I have been a strong critic of the Democratic Party, and I'm not active in my local Democratic Party, and I suppose I regret that because I feel like I've complained about the party without actually trying to fix the party from within. And I think that that's a failure of mine personally. I think that it's easy to complain about a party. In fact, I suppose I always thought of myself as a Will Rogers sort of Democrat. I'm not a member of an organized party. I'm a Democrat. But I realize, and certainly the situation that we saw in 2016 with the fights over the platform and with the way the DNC was run, revealed to me that I had been remiss in not actually getting involved in my local party and my state party and really trying to change it. And so you may not have the appetite for doing so either, but I do think that there's tremendous value in really becoming involved in your local and state and national party and really taking it over, quite frankly, because I think that's what needs to happen. And I think that's what, in fact, probably is happening. And I'm extremely heartened by that because in my day job, one of the things I do is track the Koch brothers quite closely. And what yeah, I know. But what I see from my perspective is that, let me just tell you, I'll just pause to just give you this contrast. So, you know, when David Koch ran for vice president in 1980 with Charles Koch's money and his money to bankroll the Libertarian Party, and they got 1% of the vote to the far right of Reagan, promising to privatize almost everything that was almost everything that they could, and things that weren't even on the radar screen of most people to privatize. You know, he was soundly rejected. Their ideas were soundly rejected, and they realized at that moment that even with their vast wealth, they actually really could not create a viable third party that would counter the Republican Party. And so, from my perspective, they set about to basically take the Republican Party over from the inside. Now, unlike you all, I presume, they had, you know, billions of dollars at their disposal, but because they're cheap, they actually didn't spend billions of dollars to do it. In fact, the seeds for that were laid much earlier. In the 1960s, Charles Koch, when he returned to Wichita to work by his father's side at Koch Industries, he became involved with the John Birch Society and a group called the Freedom School, which was down here outside of Colorado Springs, which the Freedom School was pushing, in its own words, anarchical capitalism. Anarchical capitalism, the belief that the government really shouldn't be involved in anything besides protecting property, private property. Everything that should be privatized should be privatized. We shouldn't have public schools; those were called government schools. Everything should just be free market, everything. And in those sessions down there in Colorado Springs, Charles Koch, who brought his brother David to those meetings, spent a great deal of time thinking about how they could change society, because they felt the John Birch Society was aiming too high. The John Birch Society was trying to recruit Barry Goldwater to be their presidential candidate in 1964, not the Republican candidate. He lost soundly in 1964. And Charles Koch's perspective on that, and I have documents that show his thinking from that period, was that it was not very useful for them to be involved in politics in the 1960s and 70s because they didn't have the infrastructure of ideas to really move people toward what I would call their very fringe ideas. And so what they did from the 80s and the 90s is really invest in institutions to try to make fringe ideas into mainstream ideas, to inject them in the political dialogue, push them through the Reagan administration in many ways, and fertilize with cash sort of the ideas that they learned in those early days through the Freedom School and through the John Birch Society. And then they also simultaneously were pushing against campaign finance rules, against rules to prevent corruption. They were investigated in 1996 for their activities involving a group called Triad, which was sort of the trial balloon of the dark money operations that they were going to do. Fred Thompson shut down that investigation, wouldn't allow subpoenas to go to the Kochs. They denied involvement. Subsequently, whistleblower confirmed their involvement. And then they sought to basically try to prevent the McCain-Feingold law and then kill BICRA, the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act, by basically challenging it and funding groups to basically challenge those laws, which ultimately result in the Citizens United decision, which is where we are today. In this world in which they have basically taken the Republican Party over from the inside out, the presidential candidates go to their meetings to kiss their ring. They've assembled billionaires to help them achieve their goals. In the states, the Republican Party is probably as, in some ways, weak, not a good brand, as sometimes the Democratic Party is. But what's happened is that the Koch brothers operation, Americans for Prosperity, and other groups have, in essence, filled the gap. They do the legwork. They knock on the doors. They do the phone calls with their so-called freedom phones. They do the bus tours. So the Republican Party has become, in essence, the Koch party. And even though the Kochs did not endorse Donald Trump for president, they have their people and their acolytes in key positions, including the vice presidency, their chief lobbyist. You can go down the line and see all the Koch connections. I mention this because not to make you feel daunted and not to get off topic, but to say I think one of the lessons of 2016, if some people apparently needed this lesson about this so-called lesser of two evils, but there actually is an evil out there, I think that we have a situation where. While, as Heather said, there is a lot of focus on the divisions within the Democratic Party and the failures of the Democratic Party, there is, in fact, a substantial force of power that is working to dramatically and radically, I would say reactionarily, change our country. And we have, what we can counter them with is people power. That may seem inadequate to counter the money, but the reality is that as you've seen in the local and state races so far this year, there is and there has been a blue wave so far, and that's not due to the National Party. That's due to the local efforts of individuals, person after person after person, talking to their neighbors, bringing people out to vote and saying, this matters, our country matters, this is not the direction we should be going, we should not be ceding territory to the corporate Republicans or the corporate Democrats, and we need to basically take this party back, take our state and local legislatures back, take our Congress back, and get our government to work for us and not for the richest billionaires in the world, whichever party they're giving money to. So because you've applauded, I'm going to conclude there.
All right, thank you all so much for coming. I'm Ian Milhiser. Like I think my other two panelists have noted, this is an awkward time for a Dems in Disarray panel because there's nothing like a common enemy to unite people. And so I think that the Democratic Party's short-term prospects look very good. I want to talk about what I fear are some structural problems that are facing the party and that I think aren't going to be easy to fix. So the primary promise of the Democratic Party is that the Democrats will use the arms of government to better people's lives. I mean, that's what center-left parties do. And the problem with that promise is that it's an increasingly hard promise for anyone to keep, because our government has become so dysfunctional. I don't want to preview too many of my remarks from this afternoon's Congress is Broken panel, but I think y'all probably know what I'm talking about. In 2008, President Obama came in not just with the commanding victory himself, but with the largest majorities we've seen in a very long time in the House and the Senate, and was barely able to move a legislative agenda forward with that kind of a supermajority. The likelihood that that supermajority is going to be repeated again anytime soon is vanishingly small. And if anything, the Democrats' problem getting that kind of majority, getting a majority of any kind, is going to get worse in time. According to one projection, by 2040, 30% of the people live in 70% of the seats, 70% of the people live in 30% of the seats, which means that 30% of the people will control 70% of the seats in the United States Senate. And if you look at how our population is sorting right now, that's not good news for Democrats. So what I think the Democratic Party needs to be afraid of is not how does it win its next election and get into power, but given that it will find in our, somewhat dysfunctional constitutional system of government, will find it very hard to deliver on its own promises when it does, how will it then convince voters to stay on the ship? I think that when I look at a lot of young Democrats, I often see a kind of Tea Party envy there. And what I mean by that is, so, if you are maybe 28 or 29 years old, here is your experience in American politics. You came of age around the time we elected center-left Jesus. Barack Obama was the perfection of all the virtues that liberals said that we believed in during the Bush administration. He was brilliant. He was empirical in his approach. He was ambitious. He supported, policies that we agreed with, and he was able to get a lot done, especially in those first 2 years. But there was a whole lot that didn't happen. They didn't pass the immigration bill. They didn't pass the environmental bill. Dodd-Frank and the Affordable Care Act both had to be watered down because you had to get the conservatives and then ultimately Scott Brown in order to pass them. And for a lot of people who came of age during the recession, they didn't get much of a recovery. And they could have gotten more of a recovery if we'd had a functional government, if we'd been able to pass a second stimulus plan, if after Republicans gained the House, they didn't spend their entire time trying to sabotage the federal government. But those were not promises that Obama could deliver on, and I think that he became aware of that. If you look at the difference between the 2008 campaign and the 2012 campaign, there was a marked difference in the ambition of President Obama's proposals, and I don't blame him, because he knew what the constraints were the second time around, and he didn't want to lie. So while I think young Democrats watch this happen, while we're young Democrats watching this happen, what they saw was a strident, uncompromising movement take over the Republican Party, and they saw that party, that movement seemed to win. And so I think that a lot of folks came out of that lesson thinking that, we can emulate that tactic, and maybe that'll bring us victory as well. I don't want to repeat all that Heather just said, but I will close by saying that the other structural problem that the Democrats face is that they are much more of a coalition. They are a broader coalition. And so Democrats can't just push party policies that appeal to the base, because there are 13 bases. And I'm being urged to move us on to questioning, so I'll close there and maybe resume this in response to your questions.
Thank you. Thank you all. A brief commercial, and then I'll get to the questions. Before we turn to audience questions, we would like to quickly mention that the Conference of World Affairs 70th crowdfunding campaign. To celebrate the CWA's 70th year, we have set a goal to raise $70,000. We are a quarter of the way to our goal, and we would appreciate your support. Any amount helps. You can give by selecting the donate button in your app or by visiting the CWA website. So we're not going to pass the plate, but if you could figuratively pass the plate when you leave before the week is out, that would be terrific. Okay, so I sent a note around to the panelists saying we're being flooded by really good questions, and normally we would have a give and take around what they said. I would like to get right to your questions because I just think I'm really pleased with the quality and the number of questions.
Could they please stand when they respond?
No, we'll
Oh.
speak into the mics, but no,
Can't hold the mic.
no.
It's difficult for them to be able, I think it'll move faster, okay? All right, so first question. You stated, this is for Heather, and just because it's to Heather doesn't mean the others won't have something to say. Please, you stated that that a vote for the candidate who best represents the Democratic Party, okay? What about what is best for the country? Thank you.
Okay, well, number one, actually, the real thing I think you should do is vote for the person who you think can defeat the incumbent. Honestly, that's just my personal number one priority. Then I want you to think, have whatever criteria you want. But if you think it's important for the country, for all the reasons that Lisa and Ian outlined, that over time we have a strong force that at the very least is pushing back against the worst of what Lisa described the Koch brothers trying to do, if not at very best pushing forward a vision of an inclusive, caring, mutually supportive society, then you need to vote for a candidate who's going to care not just about what he or she does in his first 100 days, but what the party and the country look like after he or she is out of office. And this is, we don't live in a system where we elect an individual. We live in a system where we elect an individual from a party. And so the individual's relationship to the party is important. And actually, again, maybe there are even some people in this room who voted in the Republican primary because you thought our country has two parties and I'd like to see the other party not represented by racist, sexist, assaulter, what other words can I use? And so you're combining a sense of lots of people did that, by the way, regardless of what their own party affiliation is. And so you're combining, you're thinking about what's best for the country with a sense of what's best for the political institutions that undergird our process. So I guess I don't see those two things as different. There's one other point that I want to sneak in and make, which is that we all commented on the Democratic Party being a coalition, but we need to be really real about what that means. And one of the things it means is it is an ethnic and racial coalition. And it is increasingly untenable to have four people who look like us talking to an audience that looks like y'all about what the future of the Democratic Party is. And that is going to be uncomfortable for everybody, but it's a reality that we got to get used to. And those of us who are Democrats should get up and thank whatever higher power we thank every day that folks who don't look like us are a large and growing and soon to be majority, if not already majority, part of the Democratic Party.
I'd like to respond real quick to the suggestion, I guess the implication in the question that there is a tension between wanting to do what's best for your political party and wanting to do what's best for your country. When I look at the agenda that the Democratic Party has typically stood for, broader access to health care, equal justice for people regardless of their race or their gender or their sexual orientation, measured use of our national security apparatus, diplomacy, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. I think these things are good for the country. And I don't think that we need to be apologetic about the belief that, we may be casting a vote because we think that that vote will advance what we also think is good for the country as a whole.
I have nothing to add on this one.
Next question. Research has shown that millennials are not happy with the current two-party system. Do you see a third party coming into play for the next presidential election?
Who wants to do Diverger's law? All right, so if I can get like down into the weeds with the political science theory here, you cannot have a third party in the United States of America unless we enact major voting reforms in every state. The reason for this is the Ralph Nader effect. The reason for this is that the United States, in almost every state and locality, has what's called a first past the post electoral system. That means that whoever gets a plurality of the votes wins the election, even if they don't win a majority. So if there are 13 candidates and the person who gets the most votes gets, say, 22% of the vote, they get to be senator or governor or member of Congress or whatever office they're running for. One of the major problems with this system is that it means that if a third party emerges, that third party is going to take votes away from the party that is most similar to it and wind up electing the party that the third party is least similar to. That's what happened in 2000 with Ralph Nader. That's happened a few times in Maine, which, despite being a bluish state, has a very hardline conservative governor, and the reason why is because in both of his elections there was both the official Democratic candidate and then this guy who was basically another Democrat who decided to run as well. So you can conceivably have a third party if we were to move to a different system of counting votes, something like instant runoff voting, where you get to rank your preferences for the candidates and you're not wasting a vote if you vote for the third party candidate, because that will eventually be transferred to a major party candidate. But with the system of choosing who wins elections that will always tend to a two-party system, for the reason that if you don't have two parties, then the third party winds up electing its least favorite candidate.
I agree, and I would just say I think that the near-term solution to this problem is that progressives need to get more and more involved in the party. I know it's super frustrating. There are a lot of people who fought incredibly hard in 2016, both at the primary level and at the platform level. But I think in the current structure, the legal structure that we are operating under, the only near-term solution is to actively basically take over the party from the inside out. If you're progressive and you think it's not being responsive to your priorities, even though the national platform is progressive and consistent, if you're not feeling that, I think that's the near-term solution, is that. And also, I would say, you get tons of email appeals from the DCCC, which is on my negative list. We can talk about that more in a bit. I'm going to go out on a limb, but I have friends of friends who work there, but I cannot believe that they are intervening in these primaries and trying to knock people out. That's for the local people to decide who they want to represent them. It's not for the DCCC to do. It's outlandish and outrageous for them to do it. But it underscores the fact that, like, why are you giving money to the DCCC versus to the candidates that you like, who stand for the issues you care about?
Okay, there was a question here for Lisa, but there's actually two related questions. We're all familiar with the dark money of the Kochs and the Mercers and so forth, and their supposed grassroots stuff. What are the Democrats doing like this? Another question is, as soon as I can pull it up here, how can Democratic billionaires best act as a counter to Republican billionaires? My question is, should we, but how do we do it if we should? Lisa, and then we can respond to the others.
Yeah, I don't know. Ralph Nader wrote a book a year or two ago. It was like this big, and it was something like "The Billionaires Will Save Us." I didn't read it all. It was really long. I'm usually not daunted by big books, I have to say. But the billionaires aren't going to save us. However, billionaires can be helpful from time to time. I wish that there were a billionaire who were going to be running ads telling people what a sham this so-called tax reform was. It's a disaster. It's having a huge impact on the deficit. It's a total giveaway to the richest families in the world to basically further consolidate their power, and a giveaway to their children. Who don't have to do work, who don't have to be concerned about the things that ordinary people are concerned about, like public schools and Social Security and health care, because it doesn't matter to them. And I suspect that there's been a tremendous coordination by the administration and some of these corporations that are pro this administration to give these bonuses, temporary bonuses, so that they could get little headlines to say, didn't you get a bonus? This tax cut is great because some people got bonuses. In fact, we've seen polling that was leaked that showed that the right wing is polling on that issue to try to push this idea that the tax cut was great because someone you may have known or read about got a bonus. While they're not talking about the CEO bonuses and the massive, destruction of our capacity to fund real programs that help real people because of this totally irresponsible tax policy that the Koch brothers have spearheaded and pushed to disastrous effect in Kansas, to disastrous effect in Wisconsin, and nationally to disastrous effect. So I'd love to see ads about that, right? Personally. Someone, somewhere. Because I know the ads I'm going to see from the Koch brothers about how great things are and how things are on track, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, in addition to their attack ads. But I would say, just to conclude, because I know there are plenty more questions, there isn't sort of a Democratic counter to the Koch brothers, and in some ways I would say that that's the right thing, because what the Koch brothers are doing, in my view, is utterly corrupting and distorting our system. And I think Citizens United has been exploited by them to that effect in terms of the way these outside groups are spending in ways that are totally unaccountable. No one sees who's really funding these outside groups that are running ads in elections, and more importantly, running ads on Facebook that are demographically targeted so that the reporters can't even see them. So someone can't debunk them and say, hey, that group name, that's a front group, here's who we think is behind it, here's why it's a lie. If you don't get those Facebook ads, you can't even respond to them. And it's compounded by the fact that Mark Zuckerberg this week testified and then issued some sort of report indicating that he's going to be partnering with the Charles Koch Institute to review the policies about how to deal with ads on Facebook. So we have serious problems, and it's going to take individual citizens standing up, saying no, voting, knocking on doors, and rejecting the Koch brothers' agenda at every turn, in my personal opinion.
So just in case we do have any billionaires in the room, because you never know, I mean, CWA is full of awesome people, there are a couple of places that I see being pretty dramatically underfunded on the Democratic side. And one thing that we're doing badly right now, and one thing that we always do badly, so three things. Number one is voter turnout. You love to write checks to candidates. That's fun. It makes you feel good. People are doing awesome with that right now. Really great. Also, people have been developing grassroots voter turnout operations. Those need your money. Whether you are a billionaire or whether you are somebody who writes $30 checks a couple times a year. So that would be thing number one. Thing number two is actually doing a variant of what Lisa described the Koch brothers doing, but in an honest, open, transparent, and participatory way. And that is the beleaguered progressives at every level who are trying both to fight back every day on the assaults that we're facing and carve out a little corner of their brain to think about what the future looks like. What do we want next? What could we do in 2019? Knock wood, in 2021. What do we want our future to look like on health policy, on national security? How, if we get a bite at reforming the reform of the tax system, what do you want that to look like? There are so many smart people all over the country who do have ideas and who don't have the resources to put staff thinking on that and planning on it and socializing it with elected officials. So if we have a billionaire in the room, start funding that. And then last point is connective tissue, which is incredibly unsexy. But again, because the future of the Democratic, if you take one thing away from this conversation, the future of the Democratic Party is not going to be a top-down, hierarchical, classically structured, like Marxist style, or even Alinsky style, frankly. We are in, ooh, did she just say that? We are in a networked, flat future, which is great because it gives more people more voices and the ability to solve problems closer to home. But it also means you have to fund people just to talk to each other and to check in across, what are you doing in Colorado? What are you doing in Florida? Oh, yeah, that thing they did with turnout in the Alabama Senate election. How could we do that here in Colorado? Who can teach us about that? How can we have the time and the resources to find out about it? And that's another area that I see Dems underfunding. Last point, when we do get a win, we have a really bad habit of saying, all right, we got that, and walking away. And something that smart campaigners have understood for a while is that you also have to kind of fund and promote and run ads around implementation and safeguarding whatever you've just won. And we were terrible at that. We did that really badly in the Obama administration, and it would be really good not to do it badly in the future, and that needs money.
I just want to add, sorry. I do think one of the things that is important and that is sort of freeing away is that we have the capacity with social media, with online tools, to tell individual stories, more individual stories about how these laws affect us. And that's certainly the case with the ACA, which is known as Obamacare. The fact is that the Democrats got a compromise bill through. It wasn't what I wanted. It saved my life. It's got pre-existing condition coverage that people want to rip out and take away. It saved a lot of people's lives, but it's not solving all the problems. In fact, it's under assault. But after that midterm election, Dems were afraid to even run and mention the ACA. Meanwhile, the R's, have been taking such license to try to attack it. But in the meantime, people have actually been using some of those healthcare programs. Some of them have been flawed because of the flaws that the Republicans built into the fight that followed. Not to get too detailed, but like the fight in the states over how those were going to be structured. The Dems sort of left the field. So it's like they won this compromise, and then they're like, done. And the nonprofit infrastructure that helped support that fight, they also went away. They didn't go and invest in making sure that gain was protected, or that people were really hearing about how it affected their lives. It wasn't until this election and this January that you could really see people coming out and saying, no, this having pre-existing condition coverage has saved my life and has made me able to get health care and not be bankrupted. And there's story after story after story of that about how government has helped work and helped make our lives better, and those stories need to be told, because we're hearing from the Koch brothers network how nothing works, nothing can change, and they want government to break so that then they can break it further. And we have to counter that through personal stories about how having public parks and how having nice things supported by our collective goodwill through taxation and progressive policy makes our world a better place.
Okay, I've got about 4 questions here that all ask a similar question. What do we have for leadership at the national level to be the face of the Democratic Party in 2020?
I'll go ahead. So we're going to have a primary. And the great things about primaries is that they give you a great chance to see who the presidential candidates are. They give you a great chance for those candidates to find out everything that could possibly be thrown at them in a general election. And we're going to see who does well in that environment and who folds. I think that there are a number of people, a non-exclusive list includes Liz Warren, Cory Booker, Kamala Harris, Kirsten Gillibrand. There's a fairly long list of people who I think have the potential to be very strong candidates, and I don't think that I think that we should expect the ordinary primary process to produce a candidate who will be fine. At this point in 2008. Barack Obama was a single-term senator, and the idea that he would run in 2008 was crazy. There were hits thrown out at President Obama during the 2008 primary that would have ended the career, or if not the careers, at least the presidential ambitions of lesser talents. He showed he was able to handle himself. And so I'm not going to guess, because I haven't seen how Cory Booker or Kirsten Gillibrand or Liz Warren or whoever else does in that setting, but we're going to see it, and then we'll know. I'll say one other, if I can confess my unpopular opinion, another strong leader that I hope we have backing us up starting next January is Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi is the best presidential fundraiser, non-presidential fundraiser in American history, and she is the best living legislative strategist. Nancy Pelosi called a vote on the Affordable Care Act when we were 35 votes down. She knew she had to convince 35 people. She gave herself an 8-day timer, and she did it. And the stuff that she had to do to get those, I have a buddy who was a member of Congress at the time, who was a member of Congress from a blood red district. And she had, not just like the Secretary of Health and Human Services, and not just the President's top healthcare advisor call him. She had everyone from his 3rd grade teacher. I'm not making this up. So, I understand that because she has been in the position of holding a coalition together, she sometimes finds herself in the position of not saying exactly what a particular faction within that coalition might like. I understand, like anyone who has been the face of a political party for a really long time, she is going to have endured a lot of attack ads for the purpose of souring the party on its leader. And I understand that if you are a Republican, you would want someone who is so skilled not to be the other party's leader, because she is unbelievably good at this. Before she saved, and then I'll stop talking about Nancy Pelosi, but before she saved the Affordable Care Act, she saved Social Security. And the way that she did it is she had all of these conservative Democrats coming to her while Bush was proposing privatizing Social Security, saying, hey, when are we going to release our alternative proposal? Because that was the White House's plan, to get Democrats to release an alternative, then we'd negotiate and come up with something that the White House still liked a lot anyway. And Nancy Pelosi's response to every one of them was, never. How about never? We are never going to compromise on Social Security. So I feel pretty confident in the party's leadership right now, even if some of them have been enduring some pretty serious slings and arrows for a while.
Let me just add something on this point, which is perhaps like many of you, I woke up in 2016 to realize that the presidential primary process, which was so well covered in the press, somehow after the very first primary, it didn't matter because the superdelegates had already voted. That was a bit of a surprise to me because I, again, was not actually actively involved in the Democratic Party, so I had no idea that these changes, these internal rules, that there was a way in which the primaries were sort of outweighed by pre-negotiated commitments by political leaders, almost entirely elected officials in the states who had committed to a particular candidate. And so I would say to you, it's 2018. Who the superdelegates are going to be in that Democratic Party, even with whatever the tweaks are they've made, are going to be elected or re-elected between now and 2020. And so these, I would say to you, absolutely, aside from that, these local races, these state races, they matter. I think personally it's important to have a firewall against Donald Trump in Congress. I think it would be tremendously important to have the Democrats take the House and have subpoena power and have the ability to stop the worst of the worst things that the Kochs want to do. I personally think that that's crucial. But the fights for our future are also happening and really happening at the state level. Are your public schools funded? Are they really going to be funded for real? Are things like Tabor, Tabor here in Colorado, which the Koch brothers organization, ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, has taken credit for helping to conceive and impose on you, are those things really impeding your ability to have a really good society that serves the needs of the people? Those are questions that are going to be solved and handled at the state level, or as well as these issues of the oil and gas industry in this state, basically trying to tamp down on local democracy, or even through the effort last year or 2 years ago to make it harder to actually get on the ballot. These things are happening at the state level. State and local races matter enormously. And they matter because those representatives are going to be those delegates, the superdelegates, and you want to make sure that you have a say in who those superdelegates are committed to.
I'll just add one quick thing to that and confess my unpopular opinion, which is that I would sort of rather not have another senator in 2020. All other things being equal, I have enormous admiration for all of the people that Ian mentioned, plus a couple of others, but there are some interesting governors and mayors out there as well. From sort of different ideological poles within our wonderful coalition. There's Eric Garcetti in Los Angeles and Mitch Landrieu in New Orleans. And I would, to Lisa's point, it wouldn't surprise me at all if somebody emerges or several somebodies emerge in 2018 and run and win fantastic statewide races that they weren't supposed to win and suddenly start looking like very shiny contenders. So, so don't pick your horse now.
Okay. 2 or 3 questions were asking about the Hillary-Bernie split in 2016, and is it going to, I mean, it seemed, there are some people who believe that that it was part of the reason why Trump won, is that the split and the animos between the factions. Is there a way of preventing that kind of thing in the next 2 years?
Yes, just decide you're not going to participate in it. Come on. I mean, you can have, I mean, every single thing, pretty sure all 3 of us did not support the same person in the primary, but
I'm pretty sure.
See, we've been roommates, so yeah, we know each other pretty well, but
I think we did support the same person in the general election, certainly.
And you haven't heard us disagreeing with each other about much of anything about where the party needs to go. And fight about the ideas, fight about the direction you want to take the party and the country. Fight, as Lisa says, to make your local party structure more responsive to you. For God's sake, like, it's just enough. Is my personal view. Whoa, not a friendly crowd on that one. Yeah. We really want to keep relitigating 2016, huh?
No. Comment from either you?
I don't know. I think you've said what needs to be said.
Okay. What strategies should be used to pry centrist Democrats like our own governor, like our Colorado Senator Bennett, who recently voted to weaken bank regulations, away from their Wall Street and corporate masters?
See, I didn't write that question. I could have written that question.
But you have the answer, right?
No, I mean, I think that is one of the challenges that we're facing. We were facing these sorts of challenges before Citizens United. The campaign finance system was already deeply challenged by both the influence of enormous interests through their PACs, through their lobbying efforts, through their other ways that they influence things, through soft money. And it's sort of on overdrive in the post-Citizens United environment. And I think that some members they think that they know best. They think they know those industries better than an ordinary citizen. They are not listening to you in some ways. I think that this is a situation in which they need to be hearing about your unhappiness and hearing again about your unhappiness with these votes that they take on any given issue. If you have a different point of view, you need to be showing up. I'd say ask them questions on video. I think you need to be asking them, putting the pressure on them. And I think also it's equally important to be thanking people when they're voting the right way. Too often we forget that. They need positive reinforcement. They need letters to the editor. They need a lot of things saying, "Hey, we went on a limb," or something. Not that was a limb, but you did the right thing. We appreciate it, and also heat to the other side. When the other side, not just to be criticizing the Democrat, but also the Republicans if they're on the wrong side of an issue. But at the end of the day, I think one of the things that Bernie showed was the power of an individual person to raise money predominantly from individual small donations in ways that could make a difference, and not just have to rely as much on the big money that's out there. But I also think that, and then I have to, can I just do one little divergent thing, which is to say, this question of raising money or spending money for candidates, one of the things that has happened to the Democratic Party as well as I'm sure the Republican Party is capture by consultants and people who are aiding the party and saying, you know, you've got to do X, Y, or Z. And what happened in Wisconsin was that we had no signs, hardly any signs for Hillary. The party wasn't investing in signs in Wisconsin. I've heard that happen in other states. When you went down to the local Democratic headquarters, they would offer to sell you a sign. You couldn't get a free sign because they had said signs don't vote. And the effect of that in Wisconsin was there were Trump signs everywhere, which were given away, you know, by the Republican Party and by, you know, some of these other operations. And people felt like they were, you know, maybe they were on the losing side for Hillary. People weren't willing to put a sign in their yard for her. It wasn't. There may have been that may be the case for some people, but in fact, they were actually not distributing signs. And that was because some consultant, and I've tried to look into this, basically said, you know, signs don't vote and they don't get a percentage of the sign, you know, I guess they get a percentage of the ads, not the signs. But signage matters. Having people around you know who you're voting for, talking to your friends about who you're voting for, that matters. Investing in that candidate versus, you know, the national appeals that come into your inbox, that matters. And so for someone like your state senator, hearing from you matters, hearing criticism matters, and providing your personal financial support if they're doing the right thing matters.
So I'll just jump in real quick to get on a soapbox about the courts. Because, like, the reason we're stuck with Citizens United is because 5 unelected Republicans decided to foist it on us. There's a reason why Republicans stole a seat on the Supreme Court, and it's because they wanted to keep decisions like Citizens United alive, and they knew it would be dead, or at least so severely weakened that it wouldn't have much force if Merrick Garland were sitting in the junior justice seat right now. So, you know, and that, you know, doesn't even begin to count all the lower court decisions that wind up playing around with our elections at the margins. It doesn't count the state court decisions, which, you know, to give you some good news, in Pennsylvania, Democrats got a majority on the Supreme Court, and then they killed the gerrymandered maps in Pennsylvania. So, you know, part of the reason why Republicans felt like they could get away with stealing a seat on the Supreme Court is because their voters were demanding it. You know, if anything, they felt they could not get away with confirming Merrick Garland. And, you know, to bring things a little close to home, it is at least possible that Democrats will control the Senate in a year. One of the senators that the Republicans are going to try to target to get him to not treat Trump's nominee to any Supreme Court seat that opens up in the next 2 years, the way that Merrick Garland was treated, is Michael Bennet. Michael Bennett's going to love to show how magnanimous he is here and how he's above partisanship and we've got to restore norms and all of that good stuff. And it seems to me that what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. And so he's going to need to hear from his constituents if that situation arises. So I want to, you know, just emphasize for you, well, you know, the importance of the courts if you're afraid of all the way that our elections have been corrupted, and also point out that if that Supreme Court seat is held open until we get another president in 2021, then you don't have to worry about Citizens United ever again.
I just want to underscore in like plus 1,000 what Ian just said. Your role in keeping your senator on the right track on the Supreme Court, if there's a vacancy to come, is absolutely crucial. And the courts matter. Unfortunately, the advertising in 2016 from the Democratic side did not, in my view, adequately tee up the actual issues at stake. Instead, in Wisconsin and other states, they ran ads saying, Senator Ron Johnson, Republican, do your job. that was an ineffective ad strategy. It said nothing to the American people about what was happening with this court and how this court is constraining our rights and our democracy. And it really, really is up to Coloradoans and the people in other states who have senators as well that represent them to make sure to try to protect our Supreme Court and give us a chance to have a reasonable, fair-minded decision considering the havoc wreaked by Citizens United, which literally has displaced, in many ways, the power of ordinary citizens in our democracy and raised questions of whether we are a democracy of the people, by the people, for the people, or whether it's money, 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 money. And I think we see where it is and where it's headed if we don't change it.
Okay. It is now 10:35, and we wrap at 10:40. Lightning round.
Oh, boy.
1 minute answers. Should the Democratic Party, if it controls Congress, impeach the president?
I'll start if you want.
Go for it.
Do they have 67 votes in the Senate? If yes, then yes. If no, then no.
I think that there's important power in starting impeachment, even if you can't get a conviction in the Senate. There are important hearings to be had about offenses that this president has committed, in my view, and that the evidence demonstrates, and more evidence perhaps to come. I think that that's part of the democratic process would be to have those hearings. But, are there sufficient votes to have an actual bill of impeachment voted on successfully? I don't know. And the Senate, given the filibuster and other procedures there, it would be unlikely for there to be a conviction under any numerical scenario. But I think that it's important to raise the questions and raise them seriously and with subpoena power about the actions of this president and any crimes that he may have committed or that many people believe he has committed.
Yeah, so I guess I'll say what Ian and Lisa have said in a slightly different way. An election result, given the population distribution, constitutional inequities, and gerrymandering that we have, an election result that produced the kind of margins in both the Senate and the House that Ian and Lisa have just suggested would be an incredible, a tidal wave like nothing we have ever seen in American history. And if that were to happen, that even under the system, the structure we have, you could elect that many Democrats, then we're in entirely new territory and fine, go ahead. Where we're going to end up, I think, instead, because our public is still much more closely divided, because a vanishingly small number of Republicans have actually rejected the president to date. And if we don't have a big enough landslide that convinces Republican operatives that they need to go out and tell their voters why they're better off without Trump, then I have to say I am very worried about the prospect of civil conflict. And I don't want to see an impeachment that fails and an impeachment that pushes some proportion of our population even further towards seeing every single organ of our government as illegitimate.
Okay.
I'm not happy about that.
We have 1 minute left. I want to thank the panel for doing a terrific job. I've been moderating for 5 years now, and I have not had a panel that has been this stimulating of questions. There are 30 questions I couldn't get to. And I think that the opening remarks really primed the pump there. Let's give the panel a round of applause.
It was a pleasure to be on the panel with you.
This was fun. How are you?
Good.